Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for June 29th, 2023. Yesterday, I gave a report on the berserk commentary coming from the war hawks in the West following the so-called Prigozhin mutiny. The idea that they smell blood in the water and that they're calling for an escalation against Russia. This is a sign that Russia's cracking, falling apart, and so on. Now, we reported yesterday on the role of the Royal United Services Institute, a British think tank, which has been pushing for an escalation going back to March 2022, when they called for providing long-range missiles and jet aircraft so Ukraine could attack Crimea. They called it the Crimea Missile Crisis. And then on April 28th, they were the first ones to report that there's an expectation that Russia will blow up the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And according to them, it's to spoil the Ukrainian offensive. Now, we have more of this kind of war hawk, absolute silliness in the last couple of days. Let me just go through a couple of these. One is reported in the Daily Telegraph, and it's an op-ed by British Colonel Hamish de Breton Gordon, a member of the Order of the British Empire and former commando of the United Kingdom and NATO chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear forces. Under the headline, Ukraine can now end Putin's crumbling regime. NATO should give Kiev the implicit permission to attack Russia itself and bring down its president. What he said is that there could be an invasion of Russia now by Ukraine with NATO's help, because Russia can't protect its borders or its major cities. So now the task is to give Ukraine, quote, the tools and latitude to exploit this weakness and bring Vladimir Putin's regime tumbling down. He goes on to argue that the room is certainly there for Ukraine forces to strike openly against Russia proper. He goes on to say, don't worry about Putin's saber rattling or threatening to use nuclear weapons. Putin can't really go with that option, he said, because if he did, he would be, quote, signing his own death warrant, unquote. So here you have from a top British and NATO official the call for an extended war going into Russia. Now, similarly, we have more from Chatham House, which is the center of British intelligence, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. Again, royal. Keep that in mind. They have a special report saying that the international response to the Russia-Ukraine war so far has been dangerously wobbly. They said that part of the problem is that, quote, Russia's wider threat to the rules-based international order is insufficiently acknowledged, unquote. Well, of course, we've been saying from the beginning that the attack against Russia is precisely because Russia is outside the rules-based order, as it should be, as are many, many other countries. An increasing number of countries realize that the rules-based order is the rules dictated by the international banks and the corporate cartels enforced by NATO military. And so the idea that there's a rebellion against this, which is not covered in the Western press, but here the Chatham House report does reference the fact that it is the threat to the rules-based order that's not sufficiently acknowledged. It goes on to say the only way to safeguard Europe's future is a, quote, convincing Ukrainian victory. So the West should support Kiev, quote, before it's too late. Backing a full and unambiguous Ukrainian victory is therefore essential. And for this, Ukraine needs, quote, a massive influx of weapons, unquote. Chatham House has a second article that comes out saying that Putin buckled during the Prigozhin rebellion. This has weakened his personal authority and grip on power. He was panicked, frightened, not sure that the army would follow him. Well, I don't know where they're getting this from. Maybe this is the war games that are played within Chatham House. But what you get a sense from this, from these articles, is precisely that the British establishment and along with them, their allies in the United States, especially with Blinken, Jake Sullivan and others, Victoria Nuland, they're prepared for not only a long war in Ukraine, but an escalation for regime change in Russia itself. And this lends some credibility to the rumors that minimally the West not only knew about the Prigozhin mutiny before it happened, but may have been egging it on. And we'll be covering more reports on that as they come out. Now, I want to shift just a little bit to the example of the hypocrisy of the West in the face of this rebellion from the global South. There was an interview with John Kerry, who is the special envoy for climate change for the Biden administration. And he did an interview on French television. And he was asked about the fact that the global South is not fully on board with the policies of the United States and NATO, including the war in Ukraine. And the interviewer said it appears as though there's a double standard. That is, that the United States can carry out wars such as the Iraq War with no consequences, but the U.S. is demanding consequences against Russia for Ukraine. And so he's asked by Rochebin, who's the interviewer, you Americans, you committed the crime of aggression in Iraq. These countries in the global South say, should we judge George W. Bush? Why isn't Bush judged in the same way? And Kerry said, no. So Rochebin said, why? And here's what Kerry said. Because there's never been a direct process or accusation or anything with respect to President Bush himself. Have there been abuses in the course of the war? Yes, he admitted. So then he was asked, was it not a crime of aggression to enter into Iraq on the basis of a lie? And Kerry said, no, no, no. Well, we didn't know it was a lie at the time. That's a lie. We knew it was a lie. There was plenty of indication that there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, that Iraq had no connection to al-Qaeda. And yet Kerry is now lying about a lie. And he goes on to say, well, you know, the evidence that was produced, people didn't know that it was a lie. So again, I think you're stretching something. This is not constructive. Now, this is the double standard that's causing nations in the global South to basically say, why should we go along with you when we've seen this before? We've seen this act, the outrage that is directed against a country which is not willing to go along and submit to the so-called rules-based order. And that's the drive behind the war. That's the reason for the intensity now of the calls for escalation against Russia and also against China. Now, I just want to bring up one other example of this. I was interviewed last night on Al Mayadeen, a very prominent television station in Beirut, Lebanon, on the riots going on in France now over the killing of a 17-year-old young man of Algerian descent at a traffic stop by French policemen. There have been 2 nights of riots, very intense riots. There's fear that these will blow up to the level of the 2005 riots in France. And so the question was posed to me is this racism or something else going on? And I said, look, there's definitely in some of the people rioting a reaction to what they see as racism, but it's much more than that. There's a social breakdown. There's high unemployment. There's high inflation. There's a sense among young people in France and all over Europe that there's no future. In France, we've just come through a period with the yellow vest demonstrations, the protests against the so-called pension reform that Macron pushed through by diktat. Now, there's a social powder keg. And what we're seeing is the anger in young people who are who do experience racism, who are on the outside, but it's not just people from outside or of foreign origin, because many young people in France feel the same thing. And on the program with me was a French professor who said, look, there are people in France who are hungry, who can't afford the food, who don't have decent jobs. And she said the middle class is shrinking in France. Now, this is happening all across Europe, as well as in the United States. There's a growing gap between the small numbers of billionaires and the vast majority of the population. And this is where the social powder keg is set to explode. Now, the important thing is that we can't allow this to just be an anarchic expression of rage, because that gives the people who are the establishment, it gives them the excuse for violent crackdown and escalation of the security state, the police state, the surveillance, and so on. That's why the Schiller Institute is saying we must organize around a positive alternative. Look to the global south and the move away from the dollar system, the de-dollarization, the move to a new security and financial development architecture. That's the solution. That's the way you address these real, legitimate economic grievances, as opposed to just violence. So this is the secret that shouldn't be a secret. And we need you to join with us to fight for this positive alternative. Toward that end, I'm going to be linking my interview with Helga Zepp-LaRouche from yesterday, where we discuss the whole strategic situation and how you organize an alternative under conditions of censorship, press lies, and so on. So take advantage of that. Click onto the link, and I'll see you again tomorrow. Tomorrow is Friday, so send me your questions and comments at harleysch@gmail.com. Hello, thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any of our videos. Support our independence to produce videos like these. Become a member of the LaRouche organization at thelarouche.org/member. By becoming a member for $25 or more, you'll get special access to the EIR Alert Daily Briefing and Weekly Magazine, which is what I read to stay on top of things.